Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Julio Godinez, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar, Why HCI Belongs on Your DevOps Holiday Wish List, brought to you by Red Hat and Nutanix. We have a great webinar for you today, but before we get started, I need to go through some housekeeping announcements. Today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any part of the webinar, you will be able to access the recording for on-demand viewing. We will be sending out a link to access the webinar on demand, or you can visit devops.com/webinars. We want to hear from you, so please feel free to send in your questions at any time throughout the program by using the Q&A tab. We also encourage discussion by using the chat tab, so let us know your thoughts or just say a quick hello. Finally, stick around until the end because we are doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards, so stay tuned to see if you're a winner. Finally, joining me today is Andrew Sullivan, Senior Principal Technical Marketing Manager, Red Hat Hybrid Platforms Business Unit, and Mark Lavi, Technical Marketing Engineer and Principal DevOps Advocate for Nutanix Inc. And with that, I'm going to put myself on mute, turn off my camera, and let you begin.
Hello, everybody. Hey, Andrew. How's it going?
Good, Mark. Good to see you again.
Likewise. I trust everybody had a good set of holidays, and I will correct the first thing that Julio pointed out. And this is a very common thing for a lot of people who are not familiar with my company. It's Nutanix. That's how we present it to ourselves. But if you ever go onto YouTube and search for Wired Silicon Valley unicorns, you'll see how the Silicon Valley comedians butcher our name all over the place and compare us to European cereals nutnicks. But we're here together today to talk about how Red Hat and Nutanix are working better together to help bring cloud native workloads across hybrid clouds. And to that end, we started officially working on our partnership earlier this year with our engineering teams working together. And in July, we announced this strategic partnership. Over the last couple of years, we've had many customers in common. Andrew will go on to explain a bit about Red Hat and OpenShift in particular in the next section. But Nutanix, being an infrastructure company, has always tried to adapt and bring workloads onto any situation, onto any cloud anywhere. And so this partnership, we've been working in an official technology consortium manner up until this point. But our goal ultimately is now to finally extend our hands and work as best as possible to make sure that our customers have the best possible experience when we bring our products together. And so the reason for this is because ultimately every customer is driving towards a hybrid cloud scenario, even in part or in full. And when I say hybrid, I mean VMs and containers, I mean different hypervisors, I mean different public clouds, and I mean all of these different infrastructures and providers and form factors all working together consistently in a hybrid fashion. This is the destination that everybody agrees upon. How to get there is really the difficult part that we seek to solve better than anybody else on this planet. And because it's hybrid, because we're involving many different vendors and many different technologies and many different skill sets, support and interoperability and certification is essential to make sure that this does work everywhere with the best possible support possible whenever you need to find out more, find a corner case, or improve the way your business runs. And that's everything. And quite frankly, we're going to focus today on running OpenShift on Nutanix HCI. And Andrew, you want to take it from here?
Yeah, next slide, please. So I really want to reinforce what Mark was just talking about here, which is, support. And I think the big change, the biggest thing that we see from, or that has come out of this recent announcement, is that the Red Hat portfolio, Red Hat Enterprise Linux, OpenShift, et cetera, are now fully supported on top of Nutanix and Nutanix HV. It used to be that it was, we supported RHEL and OpenShift when it was VMware as that intermediary hypervisor. So this is a big change, and it's something that's really important to allow us to really capitalize and be able to take advantage of those underlying platform capabilities to the maximum extent. We want to provide that interoperability, and that includes things like our two engineering teams working closely together, right? I see those Slack conversations. I see where it's engineer to engineer conversations and product manager to product manager conversations of what's coming down, what's happening on the roadmap. How can we work together to deliver the best, most integrated, most robust experience across, both platforms ultimately?
I'll just add one tiny bit there. And Andrew highlighted perfectly. This is just the beginning of our partnership, and there is a long roadmap of many more potential products that can work together. Today, we'll focus on OpenShift, and we will also closely or clearly delineate when something is not currently shipping, right? It's part of our roadmap. It's part of our engineering teams working together. And because of that, we'll say these are forward-looking statements, and they are due to potentially come at different delivery dates, come at different scopes, or potentially never ever deliver. So we want you to be able to understand what we have today and make your purchasing decisions based upon what is currently shipping, not what's going on in the future. And we'll delineate whenever anything is a forward-looking statement or future-based.
Absolutely. And I'll also encourage you to use the contact information that we provide on the first and last slides here. You can always reach out to us and ask questions about clarification, etc. So, and I see everybody in chat, there's a lot of people from all over the world. There's a lot of time zones represented here. So thank you everyone for joining us today. We really do appreciate that. So thank you. So I want to start off by, kind of addressing the question here of why OpenShift? And if you've been paying attention to Red Hat for roughly the last, 5-6 years now, you've heard a lot about containers. Earlier this year, back in May of 2021, Kubernetes itself celebrated its 6th birthday. And Red Hat has been a part of that. We've been engaging and putting forth effort into Kubernetes since before it even hit that version 1.0 release. And OpenShift is the result of that. So I want to start by talking about why are we talking about OpenShift itself in this context? So let's talk about applications, right? Modern applications, and what it actually means to do development in this Kubernetes era. So when we think about that, containers, Kubernetes, all of these things move really fast. I don't have a slide of it here in these slides, but if you've ever seen the CNCF landscape, right, it's this massive wall-sized diagram that comprises something like 1,000 different projects that are running inside of there. And it can be overwhelming. There's nothing that says that you can't go out and you can't build a Kubernetes solution that precisely meets every different component, every different aspect of your application and your organization. But the goal with OpenShift is to select the best of those, the ones that we feel have the most success, that provide the best capabilities, and then we apply what I like to call the Red Hat magic, right? And this is what we've done with Linux for the last 25 plus years. We work with those upstream projects, we work with those components in order to bring them into our products and provide all of that testing and validation and ultimately supportability associated with them. So we take all of those CNCF projects, we take all of those things that make up Kubernetes, and we turn that into a Red Hat product that you can rely on, that you can trust to be able to provide all of those all of those application resources for anything that you're doing inside of your environment. And importantly, and one of the reasons that Red Hat and Nutanix have partnered together is we do this across the hybrid cloud. Our goal is so that regardless of whether you're deploying on premises, whether you're deploying to a hyperscaler, kind of wherever you happen to be deploying your applications to, we can provide the same application experience. OpenShift is OpenShift. It doesn't matter where you're deploying to, and the same infrastructure experience. So it's this really powerful combination of simplifying, of providing a fully supported stack of technology, kind of regardless of where you happen to be deploying your application to. So let's talk a little bit more about OpenShift 4 itself. Next slide, please. So OpenShift 4, again, when we focus on that hybrid cloud concept, brings a huge number of different capabilities that were not available previously in OpenShift 3 and are oftentimes not impossible, but they're complex to do outside of a fully integrated, fully tested, fully validated environment like OpenShift 4. So I'm just going to pick on a couple of these, and I'm going to start with simplified installations. This one is near and dear to both Mark and I's heart because it's something that we have focused on, we've talked a lot about. We'll have a demo of what that's going to look like in a few minutes. But being able to go through and at the click of a button, use that automation to deploy an entire cluster that takes just a few minutes. And at the end of that, we have a cluster that is completely production ready. Now, some people will say that that's not always a good thing for OpenShift, right? It can be hard to get, just give me a testing cluster. I just want something that's disposable that I just don't want. That actually comes from something we call code-ready containers. But for a production level cluster, you want it to be opinionated. We want it to be so that at any time you can scale from 1 instance to 1,000 instances, and you can do that seamlessly. And you can you can do that without worrying about re-architecting the entire infrastructure. And again, this is where Red Hat and Nutanix fit really well together. Guess what? With the Nutanix platform, you can go in and you can scale that infrastructure with the appropriate metrics, right? I need more storage, I need more compute, whatever it happens to be, dynamically, just like you can with that OpenShift infrastructure. So I'll pick on a couple of others here. So things like integrated Linux operating system patching. If you're familiar with how you do things like traditional data center virtualization management, right? I have a management console, and inside of there, I have all of my hosts, and I can go in and do things like, patch this host, apply these updates to this host. Well, I can do the same thing with OpenShift and my Kubernetes, my compute nodes. So I can now use the platform to manage the platform. So going in and doing things like updating not just the operating system, but the entire stack of technology. So Kubernetes, all of my components inside of there, monitoring and logging, etc. So the last thing that I'll pick on here on this particular one is kind of that list of things on the right-hand side of this bulleted list. These are all add-on capabilities, all things that are available, like Service Mesh, Istio, serverless. I can't get that word out. All of these things are capabilities that, again, Red Hat has brought in. We test, we validate, we verify, and then we fully support those across kind of all of those places that OpenShift is deployed to. So it doesn't matter whether you're deploying, with Nutanix, you can deploy virtual machines for your virtualized application components that can talk to containers for those containerized application components running in Kubernetes, running in OpenShift, or serverless and function as a service type of things also running inside of OpenShift. All of those can coexist on the same platform today. Next slide, please. So just to reiterate this a little bit, I'm going to take the next couple of slides and kind of dig into some of these a little bit. So this diagram on the left-hand side is what we lovingly refer to as the layer cake. As you can probably imagine why, right? It's a bunch of different layers. I want to reiterate here that down at the bottom, we have all of those different icons that represent different places you can deploy infrastructure to. And we're talking, right? Nutanix is the co-host of this particular webinar, which means that Nutanix can deploy into all of those places as well. So again, full first-class citizen, right? A great place that is fully supported from both of our companies to deploy OpenShift and take advantage of that infrastructure. And on top of that, we deploy OpenShift. Now remember, OpenShift, we rely on Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and Red Hat Enterprise Linux CoreOS is the operating system there. So this was that big change that we talked about at the beginning here of our two companies work together to validate, test, support, and work together on future roadmaps for that going forward. After that, we deploy Kubernetes on top of that CoreOS or those CoreOS instances. And then we add the flavor, right? All of the things that make OpenShift OpenShift. And this is something that I think a lot of people don't realize, and that is OpenShift is Kubernetes. It really is. It is Kubernetes at the core. All of the things that make OpenShift OpenShift are deployed as services, as pods, as daemon sets, as deployments, right, on top of that underlying Kubernetes instance. So if you are using Kubernetes today, guess what? You can bring your application directly into OpenShift. You don't have to make any modifications there. Now, those vertical columns that we have going across the top, those are different things that we then add on top to help make things easier for both the administrator and the developer. So you can see on the managed workload sides, right, it's things like bringing in the full stack logging. So that way you can see exactly what's going on from the application the way down, right? Taking advantage of pipelines, taking advantage of the service mesh. On the right-hand side, all of those developer services around how can I quickly and easily take my code from, well, writing code, banging at the keyboard, into production or test, depending on how far I'm willing to go in an automated fashion. So OpenShift brings all of these things together underneath one umbrella. Next slide, please. So just to focus a little bit on the developer side of things and concentrate on a couple of these, I want to talk about the top bullet here on this particular list, and that is code-ready workspaces. So you heard me mention code-ready containers a moment ago. That's a way to get on your laptop or on your desktop a single node instance of OpenShift that you can use to quickly develop containerized Kubernetes-based applications. Code-ready workspaces, on the other hand, provides a full development environment that is running inside of an OpenShift cluster. This is a really powerful tool for development teams that want to quickly onboard new people to the team. Right? Here is your environment. It has all of the things, all of the tools that you need to be able to be up and running within a short amount of time, right? A few hours as opposed to a few days or even a few weeks. And that includes doing things like, well, I'm going to commit code from inside of this environment. Now it's going to build that code. It's going to test that all from within the cluster and then return those results back into my IDE, my web-based IDE in that instance. So this massive improvement in quality of life, hopefully, for those developer teams. And again, allowing them to focus on code and not the platform and not the infrastructure. So the others listed in here are kind of expansions on those features that I talked about previously. Pipelines is one of my favorites, right? This is introducing the Tekton concept or Tekton into OpenShift. So that way I can write an entire CI/CD pipeline directly into that. And I can do things like store that entirely in Git so that when I make that commit into, say, the production repo, it will then trigger that pipeline to build, to test, to validate, and optionally publish that into wherever I happen to be at. And that is different than GitOps. GitOps is also supported and works with OpenShift and is a great way to have declarative configuration of Kubernetes, of OpenShift itself, and everything that's happening inside of there. Next slide, please. So the other thing I'll talk about is now from the operator side. So we talked about applications and developers. Now we're talking about the admins, the people who are managing and operating that underlying cluster. And one of the things that I want to talk about here is the second bullet, the one that says do less in quotes with operators. Operators are a concept in OpenShift that takes all of those things that we as administrators do and codifies them and then lets the cluster manage them for us. And this is effectively the way that OpenShift itself works. So the example that I use here is the registry. OpenShift has an integrated registry. And instead of me, the administrator, having to go in and deploy, do a OC apply -f and then go in and edit a config map and then go in and change some other things regarding that, instead, I go into the operator's config, that one CRD, that one custom resource definition, and say maybe, hey, I want you to use this Nutanix object store for your storage. And the operator manages that configuration. It doesn't matter if I have one instance of the registry or 10 instances of the registry. I make that one change, and the operator propagates it out and configures everything for me. This applies with basically everything that is OpenShift itself. Not only that, and I tend to talk about this on the previous slide a little bit, operators also give us the ability to have a catalog of applications available. So we use those custom resource definitions and the operator and say, hey, I need an instance of MySQL or whatever it happens to be, and the operator handles that for us. So I'm going to bang this drum one more time, and that is the deployment flexibility. Down there at the bottom, right? Again, the combination of OpenShift and Nutanix means that we can deploy literally anywhere that you need those resources to be at. So from the core data center to the hyperscaler to the edge, right? It's going to be the same experience, the same sort of configuration, the same expectations across all of those. And I think that's really important to focus on. Next slide, please. So my last slide in this particular section is around the different editions or not necessarily versions, but the different levels of OpenShift available. So if you just need a Kubernetes platform that has been, validated, trusted, tested from Red Hat, right? That's what we lovingly refer to as OKE, or OpenShift Kubernetes Engine. If you want to add in all of those capabilities, all of those things around managing and deploying applications, that's where we're talking about OpenShift Container Platform. So you can see in the list of add-ons here, and this is just a partial list, there's a bunch more stuff that's inside of here, right? Inside of that list of things is all of those things to make the application easier to deploy and scale and ultimately develop. But what I really want to talk about here is Platform Plus. This is a relatively new offering from us. It is a bundle of, as you can see in the list there, Advanced Cluster Management for Kubernetes, or ACM, Advanced Cluster Security for Kubernetes, ACS, Quay, as well as OpenShift Container Platform. So the advantage here is that now I can use that infrastructure, right? Again, Nutanix and OpenShift working together across all of those different locations. And I can use tools like ACM and ACS to deploy clusters across all of those locations, and then use policy-based management for configuration, for security, for all kinds of different things that are running inside of those clusters. And of course, Quay acting as that global registry that's basically infinitely scalable to meet those needs. So OpenShift Platform Plus and the hybrid cloud methodology, the hybrid cloud benefits that I've talked about so far, and Mark will certainly talk about as well. And all of that management all the way down in through the infrastructure via Nutanix, it means that we have that full stack of capabilities, all wound up, all integrated together, going top to bottom. Next slide, please. So, Mark, I don't remember. Am I supposed to cover this one?
No, we'll start here, because now that we've presented what OpenShift is, the next step is to talk about how does Nutanix help it run better. And that means we need to introduce Nutanix and HCI, our contribution towards this, and how very much you can run OpenShift in a public cloud, in a private cloud, in a hybrid cloud, in a traditional data center, or at the edge, and try to drive all of these to have what our DevOps mission was. I talked to Patrick Dubois, the co-creator of DevOps. He did this back in 2009, and he created the Agile Admin Google group. And his entire goal back then was to make sure that he could work with IT, get resources provisioned as quickly as possible, such that he could drive the workloads and the applications as quickly as possible. And this was something that was incredibly hard, incredibly siloed. So the very same year that Patrick Dubois started to create the Agile Admin Group was the year that Nutanix was incorporated. And that first decade of Nutanix was creating hyper-converged infrastructure, HCI. And I'll explain how we've matured that in our second decade to be hybrid cloud infrastructure. But let's begin with, what does the traditional data center look like for a lot of our customers and the challenges that they have? Well, they have different vendors and different teams and different skill sets working on the network, a separate team working on storage, and a separate team working on compute. Let's put aside virtualization and Windows and Linux and everything else that can also further divide and specialize these teams. Long story short is that to do this at scale, most IT organizations are spending most of their time on just keeping the lights on, making sure that every proprietary data fabric, storage fabric, network fabric is updated, its operating system, its firmware, its BIOS, the ASICs firmware and such. When you do this with hundreds of servers, thousands of networks, and so on, the scalability of just maintaining this and keeping it up to date and secure is roughly 80%. That means roughly 20% of our customers had been only supporting the business to advance it that portion of their time. And the business is like, why is it take so long to do things? Why can't you make things simpler such that you can pay more attention to me? So hyperconverged infrastructure collapsed all of those different vendors, relationships, and hardware onto commodity x86 hardware or other platforms, and software defined everything that was provided by the firmware, BIOS, ASICs, and so on, such that we now have virtualized storage, virtualized networking, and virtualized compute. And these are done all on each node. Each node is just in a rack. This is when we're talking about on-premises data centers. And this is how we make a private cloud experience, because now we don't have to have an esoteric storage fabric, because everything can be now done with bus speeds. We understand where the workloads are. We understand what the storage demands are. So we're going to make sure that they get data locality. They're going to work on the same node. They're going to work with the local disk over bus speed, not over network speed or fabric speed. And this is really how we have software defined the data center, by collapsing all of those different vendor relationships, all of those proprietary networks and hardware, and finally making it all software defined. What this means is that we not only hyperconverge the different 3 tiers of network storage and compute, but we've also converged all of the different teams. And when you finally build all of this distributed infrastructure network over software with open APIs and cloud native technologies, this is how you provide a cloud experience for a traditional data center on any sort of hardware that you want. Nutanix really tries to drive this agnostically across different cloud providers and different hardware providers. And that's how we can drive a consistent control plane with APIs ripe for automation into a single pane of glass experience. And this means that every data center, every Nutanix cluster, it doesn't matter where it is, can be driven consistently. And because it is a fully distributed fault-tolerant system, we automate a lot of the outcomes such that the infrastructure becomes very much a solved problem. So this means that at the end of the day, we invert the problems, and the business now focuses 20% on just keeping the infrastructure running. Adding another node is a Lego brick-like experience. Just install it, rack and stack it, or add it to the cluster through the web console. And let's focus on the business. Let's focus on running OpenShift. Let's focus on driving more and more cloud native operations and goodness to the business. And this is completely homogeneous, right? Again, just as much as we want to be hybrid between VMs and containers, we also potentially need to be hybrid between sizes of nodes, right? Maybe we need to dial things more for storage heavy nodes or storage only nodes or compute heavy nodes, right? Because again, right, the more cloud native we get, the more we can probably potentially get to, I just need to optimize storage GPU and memory for our clusters. So this is completely hybrid in its operation and in its expansion, and a completely linear experience on scaling workloads. So not only do we solve all of the scale of infrastructure and all the proprietariness of what it takes to upgrade it by making it software defined, we also make that one-click upgradable, schedulable. And because the workloads are now running completely in a virtualized manner, we can always update Nutanix itself without disruptions in most cases for almost every operation. And in that regard, your Nutanix cluster will only get faster and better over time, rather than what we had with the traditional way of looking at infrastructure. So in this regard, Nutanix not only drives across multiple different infrastructure providers, on-prem and off, public clouds and private, and creating private clouds, but it drives a control plane with additional services for storage, for desktop, for database. And this is how we have now moved from hyper-converged infrastructure in our first decade to hybrid cloud infrastructure and hybrid cloud management in this second decade of our analysis. So now we're going to focus in on the solution of how do we run OpenShift on top of Nutanix HCI. And really, it's just as Andrew showed you a one-layer cake diagram, we're going to show you a couple different variations of roughly this same diagram with a different amount of detail. So at the bottom, we basically have whatever provider you have. We do not care if it's on-prem, public cloud, or otherwise. Nutanix software defined and virtualizes whatever the infrastructure provider is. It provides a number of different data services that now allow us to drive our hypervisor, and we'll get into the hypervisor section right after this. We use AHV here, and we've worked with Red Hat to fully certified RHEL on AHV, as well as OpenShift, as well as a number of other projects. But as far as OpenShift is concerned, this is how we drive the entire stack such that everything for the infrastructure underneath OpenShift can, 1, become turnkey, 2, become non-disruptively upgradable, and 3, can scale linearly, infinitely, and also drive hybrid operations across this, such that now, again, we can focus on trying to drive those containerized and virtualized workloads in consistency in a hybrid fashion and continue to migrate towards our future. Andrew, do you want to add anything here?
I just want to reinforce that, that you showed a slide or two ago, the linear growth and being able to, customize that cluster's layout according to what the application needs.
Yep.
And it fits exactly the way that you would expect with, Kubernetes and containers and OpenShift itself. Hey, I want to use the horizontal pod autoscaler or the vertical pod autoscaler because my pods need, more instances or more resources. I can add OpenShift nodes dynamically that meet those resource needs. My infrastructure starts to, I need more of one type of resource or the other. I can add those nodes in. So it's going back to that, everything is dynamic. It is seamlessly scalable, both up and down, to accommodate the needs of that application. It's something that is really, really impressive to be able to do. Some people would say, oh, we've been doing that in hyperscalers for a long time. Well, you can do it on premises too. So that's really impressive to me.
So we're going to now address the different layers of this stack. Andrew's given us already a great overview of OpenShift. We're going to now focus a little bit on the virtualization and the data services, and then finally automation of this entire stack together. So let's talk about the hypervisor and why OpenShift runs better on Nutanix HCI. So Andrew, do you want us to kick us off a little bit with what is KVM, how that relates to AHV, and how OpenShift has run and how it is running jointly on our solution?
Yeah, and this is the fun and exciting part to me, right? I'm an old virtualization and storage guy, so these sections are my bread and butter. It's what gets me gets me up in the morning, if you will. So KVM, kernel virtual machine, is the Linux kernel hypervisor. It's something that has been in the kernel for over a decade now. And it's used not just by Red Hat and things like Red Hat Enterprise Linux, it's used across the industry, including multiple hyperscalers use KVM. So really what I'm reinforcing here, what I'm trying to say is that it's a trusted platform for kind of all of your workloads. It doesn't matter how small or how large that happens to be, KVM can comfortably fit that. And AHV, being KVM, can of course accommodate that as well. And going back to what, again, that drum I was just banging, right now we can flexibly scale up and down in order to accommodate all of those workloads inside of there. And I don't know if there's any Red Hat folks who are watching. If there are, you've probably heard me talk about how OpenShift is a concentrator of workloads, right? We're taking multiple applications, we're putting them in containers, and then we're putting them into, maybe just a few of those OpenShift nodes. So having that infrastructure underneath it that can rapidly scale out to accommodate, maybe I need to go from one instance of a pod to 30 to 300 instances of a pod. Right? Having that underlying infrastructure that can help me with that as well makes it incredibly invaluable. Next slide, please. So this is our kind of high-level architecture diagram of how everything fits together. So I like to focus here on kind of the middle part, the AHV, and then talk about the bottom and the top and how it relates to that. So AHV, being the hypervisor, is where we did all of this certification and testing work to make sure that CoreOS and RHEL are able to run inside of there. When we deploy OpenShift to AHV, this is really what we're talking about. We did all of that validation to make sure that, hey, when you deploy OpenShift, which deploys on Red Hat Enterprise Linux CoreOS or Red Hat Enterprise Linux, that it's going to be a known and trusted platform and one that both of our companies can support together. Basically, we know what it is, we trust it, we know when we do this, it's going to do this, and we know if we see this problem, it can be solved this way type of thing. Now, where the magic happens, if you will, with regard to OpenShift, is when we start talking about what's happening in the diagram here, it's below that, but that's where all of those other platform capabilities of Nutanix come into play, AOS and the management piece. You'll see here on this slide, we've really highlighted the storage capabilities associated with Nutanix's platform. So things like using the certified CSI provisioner to be able to dynamically provision and consume block and file storage for those containerized applications. And so not only is OpenShift running on top of the Nutanix hypervisor, it's directly consuming the storage being provided by the platform. Right? We can utilize that Nutanix object storage. I mentioned the example of the registry before, but it's certainly not the only, any application can use object storage if you so choose. And at the top, it's just OpenShift. No, I say that tongue in cheek, right? Of, the goal here is really, on top of these capabilities, on top of the platform is OpenShift and all the things that happen inside of there. We hand waved over it in the graphic here by just saying containers with application inside of it, but I think we all know it's not that easy. Next slide, please. So as I said before, storage and virtualization is kind of my, it's really my passion. It's something that I've been doing for, over 20 years now. This is what's really exciting to me. So I do want to point out, and Mark, we deliberately highlighted OpenShift Data Foundations, ODF, which is the rebranding of OpenShift Container Storage inside of here. And I really want to point out that we're not competing in this respect, right? We're not positioning, the Nutanix data services versus OpenShift Data Foundations or anything like that. It really comes down to utilizing the solution that best meets your needs. So Mark, I'll hand over to you to talk about, Nutanix data services and what's available there.
Okay, thank you. So again, here's another block diagram to kind of show how Nutanix, in a sense, sandwiches OpenShift, but in doing so is trying to make OpenShift as much as possible something that is automatable and turnkey and ultimately ephemeral as much as possible. And by doing that, it's by providing on top of any hardware provider, that's the bottom layer, our hyperconverged storage, that's AOS. We've already talked about AHV as the hypervisor that is just built in with Nutanix, right? It is an industrial strength wrapper around Linux KVM. So that's why Red Hat was so comfortable and could certify the solution so quickly. So all that is AHV and AOS are completely provided by through a web console called Prism. That's this second to top layer. That's our web console. That's where all of our RESTful APIs, our open APIs are located for automation and for our control plane. And such, we also can provide additional data services to whatever the hyper-converged provider is underneath it, be it IBM, Lenovo, Azure, AWS, or even some of our other OEM relationships. It doesn't matter. So the point is that not only can we bring up OpenShift on top of AHV, but we can also provide the container storage services through our CSI driver, and we can also stand up volumes for NFS, files for NFS access to through the CSI driver, as well as volumes for iSCSI or read-write many access into, read-write only access into from the containers onto the storage of whatever the Nutanix cluster is on whatever cloud provider you have. So we'll come back to this diagram in a little bit, but the whole point is, how could I bring up another OpenShift cluster, have the fully available data services ready, up and ready to go, and make this turnkey? So that's what happens ultimately, is how do you, in a sense, automate and make a one-click type experience for another OpenShift cluster with whatever permutation of networking access, storage access, and data service access as you need. This is what we're delivering to make it as simple as possible and as scalable as possible. So did you want add anything else there, Andrew, or should we drive on to automation?
No, I'm excited to see the demo, so I'm not going to hold you up.
Okay, cool. I'm just doing a quick time check, and it looks like we're right on track. Have you seen anything in the chat or the Q&A so far that we need to address? Otherwise, I'm going to keep going on.
All right. There is a question in the Q&A, but I think we'll hold off on that till the end.
Okay.
But I will just put a reminder out there for everybody. Don't hesitate to submit questions into the Q&A. You're also welcome to chat with us. And whichever one of us isn't talking at the moment, we'll do our best to
exactly
handle those.
Because we're doing well on time. That's why we can make sure that we get to answer all of your questions. Okay, so finally, how do we make this entire experience simple, scalable, and turnkey? And the answer is ultimately automation, not just with what's built into the hybrid cloud infrastructure and hybrid cloud management platform of Nutanix, but also how do we bring OpenShift and Nutanix to also be automated completely, fully, top to bottom. And we're going to talk about COM automation, which lands in our Prism control plane. And I'm going to show you our COM blueprint for how to stand up an OpenShift cluster. As you can see, COM is really an agnostic tool that works with multiple clouds, multiple hypervisors, and really allows us to manage workloads that are VMs and containers together, as well as all the services underneath them. And if you want to bring different front ends or leverage Ansible for part of all this automation, these things work. We mix and match perfectly together. It's a better together scenario, although a lot of people think right off the bat, I'm only going to do Ansible, I'm only going to do COM, I'm only going to do Terraform. The answer is you can always have choice on all of these things, just like we've got Nutanix data services versus ODC, ODF. It's choice, whatever you want, but we bring this into the platform such that we can make turnkey outcomes. And this is a forward-looking statement right now. At our .next user conference just a few months back, we demonstrated this for the first time, how we can make basically OpenShift a blueprint that's available, which will also provision the Nutanix data services that support it all together and bring together the CSI drivers such that this starts to work just out of the box. So let me show you that demonstration right now, but this is a forward-looking statement, and our goal is to bring all of this forward in Q1 of next calendar year, so just the next few months. But again, that's a forward-looking statement. Don't make a purchasing decision based upon that. So let's start the journey. I will talk over this demonstration with logging into cloud.redhat.com, going to the bare metal infrastructure wizard, and getting the pull secret. We have a COM blueprint here. This is the editor version, and I'm basically showing you a little bit of behind the scenes, all of the different DNS and OpenShift pull secret requirements that are variables in our blueprint that we will need to orchestrate. If we have anything here with a running man, that means that you can overwrite it at runtime when we launch the blueprint. So let's save this blueprint. Let's launch this blueprint. And again, we can try this from ServiceNow or other portals. Let's create a new OpenShift cluster. We're going to keep with some basic DNS provisioning, but we do already set up a provisioning VM, which has all of the OpenShift bits, as well as everything to do the Cloud Ignition references. This is where we're pointing to that existing VM with all of those bits for OpenShift installer to leverage. And we're going to launch this off the rocket. So let me just jump a little bit forward and show you this. Actually, now here we are launching it. We're pointing to that provisioning VM, which has the OpenShift bits. And again, standing that up is just a few clicks. You don't need to put in anything, actually. And we just need to provide that OpenShift pull secret here that I mentioned from the console. Of course, we can localize this for your desired network topology and your DNS requirements, but really all we need is a top-level domain and about 3 DNS entries, that OpenShift pull secret, and we're off to the races. So here's the actual launching of the blueprint after we've given it those runtime inputs. And we can track not only all of this for what its cost is per OpenShift cluster, we can just kind of do that show back, but we also have full availability into the forensics of what it takes to deploy each stage of OpenShift. So in this case, we're very much automating the OpenShift user provisioned infrastructure installer methodology. And a forward-looking statement past that is that we're continuing to work on the IPI installer with Red Hat, and we'll get that upstreamed into a later release of OpenShift 4. But for now, this is what we have available for all of our customers. So let me scrub a little bit further forward, not show you these details so much, but end result is the blueprint runs, and within about 15 minutes, we're off to the races of actually having the basic nodes ready to go. So here we're going to show logging into the load balancer that fronts the workers. and the control plane, and we get the cube config. We also can show that we've configured appropriately the secrets. We can see all the workers of the platform. We can see all the OpenShift services coming up, and really we even set the DNS for the local references of all this. And at the end of the day, as long as DNS is properly provisioned, we can open up a browser and take a look. Not only do we have here the end result of the OpenShift installer giving us the OC admin password credentials, but let's go now exercise them. And this happens all within, I would say, roughly 30 minutes or less. To now then add the turnkey data services for files and volumes does add more time. That's where the full provisioning, the full life cycle of this blueprint from what we're going to show early next year will balloon up closer to the hour time frame, maybe an hour and a half, I think I've seen, is where we have that full turnkey stack. But here, even here, we have in the OpenShift Marketplace, we have the Nutanix CSI driver. So everything at this point for this early version of the blueprint is ready to go. But I've seen more advanced versions of this blueprint, which also stand up all the Nutanix data services as well and configure them such that the cluster is completely turnkey. Well, I'm going to stop there, and let's wind down with our our final slide, our resources and such.
Mark, one thing I want to point out about that video is it abstracts, because it's Calm, because it's the Nutanix infrastructure, so they kind of natively understand each other. It abstracts so many of the decisions and, ultimately data inputs that you have to make. And that screen where you showed, right, it was just a series of inputs and you just left them at the defaults.
Yep.
It's a great example of, hey, just provide your pull secret, right? The one thing that is going to always be unique to you. And from there, it can kind of read everything that it needs and go through with the deployment, as opposed to going through the OpenShift documentation. Somebody who I've done a few OpenShift installs over the last few years. It's really nice to see that level of automation and integration happening.
Great.
So I will take this opportunity just from a kind of a closing or a list of resources, right, if you will. I want to highlight a few things from the Red Hat and the OpenShift side. So I always encourage folks, if you're curious about OpenShift, if you've never used OpenShift before, if you just want to learn about some new things, go to learn.openshift.com. So there's no barrier to entry. There's no login. There's no registration. There's nothing you need to do. You go there, you can click the button that says, hey, I want to try this scenario. And within about 15 seconds, you are in a live running real OpenShift cluster, and you can do kind of whatever it is that you want to inside of there. A little secret. When we used to go to conferences, right, way back when we would go to in-person things, whenever I was working in a booth, I always used the learn.openshift.com interface for demos. So if anybody ever came into the booth and said, hey, show me how this works with OpenShift, that was the platform that I always used. So definitely encourage folks to go and explore that. If you're interested in taking, kind of a step after that of deploying your own OpenShift, try.openshift.com. Great resource. It kind of walks you through, hey, do you want to deploy on premises? Do you want to deploy in a hyperscaler? All of those other things. It walks you through that process. And then last but not least, a little bit self-serving, that last link there, red.ht/livestream. So this is where we do the Red Hat live streaming. So I am a co-host of the Ask an OpenShift Admin Office Hour. We've talked about the Nutanix integrations before. We've shown some of those before. As that develops, as we add new capabilities, we'll be highlighting them on the live stream as well. So if you just want to learn more about kind of anything and everything Red Hat and OpenShift, the live streaming link is a great place to go. Mark, if you want to talk about the test drive, yeah.
Sure. And if you want to experience Nutanix, to see how we drive compute, storage, and networking all together, and even COM or other workloads, our test drive, again, just like learn or try.openshift.com, just go to nutanix.com. You'll see our green test drive button, or you can go to one-platform to land on that page directly and choose the different scenarios where you can see Nutanix give you this hybrid cloud and hybrid cloud management infrastructure experience. So that's how we drive private clouds. That's how we drive hybrid clouds. And we will be bringing OpenShift to that experience. That is definitely a goal, but that's a forward-looking statement. Just as much as we'll try to bring more of the Nutanix over to the OpenShift side of things to show those examples. But again, these are forward-looking statements for how our partnership is just getting started. You've got our addresses and our Twitter handles now if you want to reach out to us. Just to wind things down, and we'll start going to the Q&A next. This is how we're trying to create a DevOps experience for cloud-native workloads, such that the infrastructure, the hypervisor, the storage is invisible, it's scalable, it's cloud accessible, it's API accessible, it's automated, and it really becomes turnkey, so much to the point that you can make your developers happy to do self-service clusters of OpenShift on any provider to run your completely ephemeral CI/CD pipelines and workloads any way you want. This is really a DevOps outcome, and I'm really excited that we can bring the best, the leader in Kubernetes, as well as the leader in hybrid cloud infrastructure together to make this a turnkey, supported, enterprise, rock solid solution that can scale from edge all the way out to production workloads anywhere, everywhere.
And I couldn't agree more, Mark. I'm looking forward to doing more of these and having you join us for other live streams and other things as well. So I will politely ask everybody out in the audience, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to put those into either the Q&A or the chat. We're happy to address those. Mark, I don't know if you want to take a look at what's in there already and see if there's anything you want to address.
I'm going to have to stop sharing so that I can take a look at it. Otherwise, we have recursion.
Yeah.
So let me take care of that. Stop screen sharing. Okay. Okay, I've heard some people say that they've tested Tekton in OpenShift from the CD Foundation. That's great. But I haven't seen any questions. Let's go over, that's all in the chat. Now let's go over to the Q&A. Steve asks, I'm not familiar with HCI. My friend said one issue is that it consumes too much RAM. What is your suggestion for that? Well, there are many different ways to address this. And of course, the answer is it depends. But long story short is that because we're running OpenShift workloads on top of VMs, and because Nutanix is software defined also running as VMs, yes, we will have an overhead and a cost of some storage, some compute, and certainly some memory. And that, for people who are used to just bare metal, or just running with physical servers, or not even running or running virtualized platforms, but not trying to get the fully collapsed experience of software-defined networking, storage, and virtualization from the same control plane, including the automation and including now the management of OpenShift. That's where all those additional resources that you didn't account for and didn't ever manage and didn't ever have before now consumes more memory and RAM and some more CPU. So that overhead is not unexpected once you're in this world and you get all of these cloud DevOps turnkey automatable solutions, but they do have some costs. And when you compare that to bare metal and hand building everything in a bespoke manner, which we all started from, it seems like it's more than you would expect. But when you get the benefit of it, you recognize that this is exactly what's required to get all of this functionality such that you can do more with less, making your operations go further, faster, and more scalable with less manual operations, less configuration, more automation. And so that's really it's a changing of the mindset, and that's how you get the benefit of HCI and you get the benefit of turnkey OpenShift. Let's see. Anything else we have in chat or Q&A?
I don't see anything at the moment, but in the meantime, I do want to remind everybody that today's webinar has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of the webinar, you will be able to watch it again. We will be sending an email with a link to access the webinar on demand, and you can also find it on devops.com. Just look in the on-demand section in the webinars page, and you will find it there. I did mention at the beginning that we were doing a drawing for $425 Amazon gift cards, so I'll announce the winners. Our first winner is Ricardo M. Congratulations, Ricardo. Our second winner is Joe A. Our third winner is Julie H. And our final winner is Paul C. So congratulations to all our winners. We'll be reaching out to you via email with instructions for claiming your Amazon gift card. So please check your inbox, and if you don't see it there, check your spam folder. Looking at the Q&A, still don't have anything. So for now, Andrew and Mark, thank you very much for taking the time to put this presentation together and for giving us an hour of your time. All appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I'd also like to thank the audience for their time and engagement. This is Julio Godinez signing off until next time. Thanks, everyone.
Take care, everybody.